And
live from the State Department, Matthew Miller briefing reporters there. The Pentagon moments away from doing the same. Joining our coverage is NewsNation's Robert Sherman. Robert confirmed the death of Sinwar before it was officially announced earlier today. Of course, you know he's done a terrific job reporting for us from Israel over the last year, back stateside now. What have you been hearing from your sources in Israel today?
Yeah, I mean, you made a very good point here, Connell, is that, where do we go from here and is there finality? And I would say, when you're on the ground in Israel, you hear this term being used called total victory, not stopping the war until there's a total victory. But it's not very clear what that exactly means. Does that mean the return of all hostages? Does that mean the total elimination of Hamas top to bottom in Gaza? Those goalposts have not exactly been clearly defined up until this point. But I mean, you are starting to hear it coming out from Washington right now that they're hoping that this is an opportunity that segues to the ending of the war here, something that they have made no mystery about, that they've wanted to see come to a close for a long time now. But the Israelis have made clear that as long as they believe that there's a legitimate national security threat operating inside of Gaza, and as long as there are hostages in Gaza, they will not stop putting the pressure on. So that's the big thing here is, do you see a relenting from Hamas in the wake of Sinwar's death? Or do you see someone else occupying the vacuum and that resolve continuing on? That's going to be the main thing to watch in the imminent aftermath here.
What would you say about the significance of the location of Sinwar? The Israelis say it was in southern Gaza. I believe they're saying it was in Rafah. United States and the Biden administration, as I remember it, had been trying to urge the Israelis not to carry out the bombing in Rafah. Does Netanyahu now use this as an argument to say that worked and I need to continue my operations elsewhere in Gaza as well?
I mean, almost assuredly, the Israelis will point to the fact that wherever a threat exists is a place that they need to operate their military. And that's something that they've been saying for a while. I mean, we have seen countless rockets fired from southern Gaza coming from Rafah over the last few months as well. So, I mean, Hamas certainly has demonstrated military capabilities in some of those areas there. And again, it's going to come down to, as long as Israel believes that that threat has not totally been neutralized and there isn't that absolute victory, whatever that clear definition ends up being, that they're going to continue to push forward here. Now, that being said, you are starting to feel the pressure. You are starting to hear hostage families come out and say that this is a moment that needs to be seized in order to get their loved ones home. So you are going to see that internal pressure in Israel to get some kind of a deal done. But as you heard from the prime minister today, the war is not over here just in the wake of this, Connell.
Robert Sherman has been leading our coverage of that war back stateside, joining our breaking news coverage today. As promised, the Pentagon briefing, which we told you about, is now beginning. Let's join that live and see what the U.S. military's perspective is on this breaking news.
U.S. Air Force B-2 bombers conducted precision strikes against 5 hardened underground weapons storage locations in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. U.S. forces targeted several of the Houthis' underground facilities, housing various weapons components of the types the Houthis have used to target civilian and military vessels throughout the region. U.S. Central Command is still conducting a post-strike assessment, so I don't have any details to provide on that front, other than to say that we struck exactly what we intended to hit. We'll provide updates as appropriate. As Secretary Austin highlighted in his statement last night, the employment of the B-2 bomber was a unique demonstration of the United States' ability to target facilities that our adversaries seek to keep out of reach, no matter how deeply buried underground, hardened, or fortified. And it demonstrates U.S. global strike capabilities to take action against these targets when necessary, anytime, anywhere. It also sends a clear message to the Houthis that there will continue to be consequences for their illegal and reckless attacks, which put innocent civilian lives and U.S. and partner forces' lives at risk. Shifting gears, Secretary Austin arrived yesterday in Brussels and today participated in a de-ISIS ministerial, the first session of the NATO Defense Ministerial, and a productive meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. In his opening remarks at the de-ISIS ministerial, Secretary Austin highlighted the work over the last decade of the global coalition to defeat ISIS. And I quote, "For 10 years, this coalition has tackled the scourge of ISIS. Our success stems from our resolve, our commitment to working together, and our willingness to adapt. These core elements will remain at the heart of the next phase of our mission," end quote. Tomorrow, Secretary Austin will participate in the second session of the NATO Defense Ministerial and engage with his NATO counterparts to discuss strengthening the collective security of the alliance and international support to Ukraine's defense. We'll continue to provide readouts and updates on the Secretary's engagements throughout his travels. And finally, the Department of Defense continues to be fully engaged with FEMA and the whole of government relief efforts related to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. And we'll continue to work with our federal, state, and local partners to ensure we're supporting and coordinating response efforts in support of our fellow Americans. As of earlier today, the National Guard had more than 4,200 guardsmen.
So you're listening to General Ryder at the Pentagon, obviously going through some scheduling and logistics for the Secretary and what have you. I would assume when he starts taking questions, the attention will turn to the killing today of Yahya Sinwar. So we're going to watch that in the control room behind me, and as soon as that does happen, we'll probably go back to it. Retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett standing by to talk to us on the breaking news right now. So, General, thank you. Your perspective on this day, the death of Sinwar and the significance.
Well, I think the two activities that are of most importance, not only the killing of Sinwar, but the attack on the Houthi facilities. While the Sinwar death may be more spectacular, I think the lessons we ought to take away from the Houthi attack are far more significant.
Okay, tell us why, because to your point, that's what General Ryder was talking about at the beginning, before he started going through the scheduling. We joined him in progress. He was talking about those Houthi strikes. More significant than Sinwar. Why?
That's very simple. There is no need to use a B-2 and bombs that can hit what we call hard and deeply buried targets in Yemen. To my mind, that was a clear message to other actors in this region, read Iran, that we not only have the capability to get to the target, but also that we have the capability to burrow our bombs down in order to destroy the target. Clearly, it does not mean we're about to attack Iran. There's a big difference between capability and intentions. But it's what we call in the military the classic mission of a demonstration. We were demonstrating to Iran that if you give us reason, we can hit you, and we can hit you hard, and we can hit you deeply.
What do you expect Israel to do, though, when it comes to Iran? We've been talking today about whether the Sinwar killing what impact that would have on, in the near term at least, in the war in Gaza. Netanyahu says war's not over yet, so I mentioned that a few minutes ago. But what about Israel in Iran at this point? What's next?
Well, Israel right now is playing a pretty good waiting game in terms of the time, the place, and the way they're going to attack Iran. There have been some mysterious bombings going on, explosions in the north of Iran. There are other types of questionable activities going on. So I would suspect that the last thing that the Israelis are going to do is exactly what the Iranians expect, which is a conventional attack on military targets by their air forces.
Okay, General, stand by. I want to go back now to the Pentagon. General Ryder is taking questions, I'm sure, whether it's Sinwar or some of the topics we're talking about are coming up. Let's listen.
We can strike anywhere, anytime. And in this particular strike, using its unique capability and ability to carry a large payload to deliver munitions that could penetrate and strike these deep underground facilities that were storing components that the Houthis have been using. Again, it also sends a very clear message that we can strike targets of this nature anytime, anywhere from around the world. Thank you. Jennifer.
General Ryder, when was the last time the U.S. had a read on where Sinwar was, and do you still have troops helping with intel sharing on the ground in Israel?
Yeah, so I, as I'm sure you can appreciate, not going to be able to discuss specific intelligence. As you highlight and as the president's statement highlighted, we have had special operations forces and intelligence personnel supporting Israel's hostage recovery efforts, advising on their hostage recovery efforts since shortly after October 7. And so in that regard, by providing them this information, the Israelis have been able to go after and look for hostages, as well as find those who have been holding them hostage, to include Sinwar.
And in terms of the B-2 strike, had you struck these targets before with other aircraft and munitions and had to go back and use the B-2, or is this a repeat strike?
To my knowledge, this was not a repeat strike. Again, this was to go after very specific capabilities that the Houthis were storing deep underground.
All right, so
Was it
General
a
Ryder at the
response to the
Pentagon there,
23 missiles that
General
were
Kimmett is
fired
still
on
with us. Two things. I mean, on the Houthis, exactly the first answer, that's what you were saying, right? Clear message, we can target you anytime, anywhere, what he just said.
Well, I'm glad the Pentagon agrees with my analysis.
Yeah, but you know, at a message that's heard and significant is your point. I mean, I thought it was interesting that you started off by saying this is more significant than Sinwar.
Yeah, what I was really saying, without trying to make a joke of it, one of the most important things that you have to do in a demonstration mission in the U.S. military is make the demonstration unambiguous about why you're doing it and the purpose of what you're doing. And so, you know, even for an old guy like me, it was pretty obvious what they were trying to do. And I'm glad to see that Ryder agreed with me, but it really wasn't kind of hard to figure out what's going on here.
Well, you know, the old guy with a lot of experience, though, right? So now with Sinwar, I do think and we heard this, the president put out a statement, Vice President Harris put out a statement. They both mentioned the U.S. role in terms of special operations. Ryder didn't get into too many details, but what about our role in helping out over there on operations like this? What do you know about things of this nature in the past?
Well, first of all, I wish the president and the vice president weren't doing the happy dance. I kind of like the way the Israelis do it when they conduct operations, that they don't say anything about it. And I think that we shouldn't have said anything about our role in this. And I don't think that we should have revealed tactics, techniques, procedures in these kind of special operations. That's just not how we should be operating.
One more thing, just from a strategic kind of military perspective on the death of the leader of Hamas. As we started right at the top of our broadcast, we said this was one of the stated goals from Netanyahu and Israel. It's been accomplished. And then we say, well, does that mean you can start talking about ending the war in Gaza? Netanyahu was clear today, says it's not over yet. What's your view on how this does wind down, or how much this contributes to the war winding down?
Well, as an analogy, let's take a look at Hezbollah. We have in Lebanon, we have taken out 5 levels. They have taken out 5 levels of leadership, and the war goes on. Netanyahu never said that Sinwar was his target. His war aims have been completely transparent through this entire war. Number one, the defeat of Hezbollah, the destruction of its infrastructure, and return of the hostages. And now that he's added a 4th war aim, which is the destruction of the defeat of Hezbollah and the destruction of its terrorist infrastructure as well. One man is not Hamas. As you show in this picture, he's just one of many. He's important. He's at the top of the heap. But just like the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, it's not over. It wasn't over when Hania was killed in Iran. And that's the message that Netanyahu, who himself has been very clear about his war aims, reiterated today, that it's not over yet.
All right, General, thank you. General Kimmett with us here. It's a 1:15. Appreciate all the perspective, patience as we went to the briefings as well. I want to bring, for a quick comment, Noah Tishby in as well. It's been also patient waiting. Thank you for that. Israeli activist, once served as a special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. All right, so we've heard different perspectives, just a U.S. military perspective there, briefings from the United States government. But, you know, this is a big day. The leader of Hamas, you know, even if the war continues, General Kimmett suggests, and Netanyahu talked about it, you have the leader of Hamas killed today. What's your perspective on it?
Well, my perspective is that today marks the beginning of the end, really, of this disaster that is occurring in the Middle East right now and around the world. This is obviously not the end of the war. Killing one person is not killing the idea of jihadism and the idea that you can destroy the state of Israel. But Hamas and Yahya Sinwar, he's not just the leader of Hamas. He's the mastermind behind the worst atrocity, the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. He is the guy who was nicknamed the Butcher of Khan Yunis because he personally slaughtered Palestinians that he suspected were collaborating with Israel. The man is evil on levels that we really do not understand. Here's the thing that we need to remember. We have to let Israel win. let Israel conduct the operation that Israel needs to conduct. There was no intelligence specifically about where he was at the time, but there was intelligence that he's in that area. And the commanders of that area did not want to leave. They kept soldiers there specifically because of that. So allegedly, it was an accidental hit that they got on him. They just saw terrorists and they went after them and they recognized him because he's so recognizable. But what this indicates is that Israel needs to be able to let win. We know what we're doing. We have to take this down. What we're dealing with is not one organization, but it's a ring of fire led by Iran that wants to destroy the state of Israel. That's the end of the war. When that particular nexus of evil, when that particular ring, that particular evil that is Iran is going to stop trying to destroy the state of Israel, that's when it's going to be the end.
But you did say that this was the beginning of the end of what's happening. What's next then? What's the next step?
Well, we're not sure, but the one thing that needs to happen is the hostages need to return home. And I really hope that right now what they're talking about is offering money and whatever it is that they need to the people that are still holding our hostages to let them go. So this is number one objective that needs to occur right now.
And maybe Hamas is more willing to make, what's left of Hamas is more willing to make the type of deal Israel wants now, right?
Just like
you think it's more likely now, as likely as it's been?
It's probably more likely. It's also possibly more dangerous because the people that have nothing to lose, like these jihadists, they have nothing to lose. They believe in the afterlife. They're doing this in order to die and become martyrs. They can be very, very dangerous. So we're not entirely sure what would happen, but this can definitely mark the beginning of the end.
Okay.
We also, sorry.
I was going to say the one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because your perspective would be interesting on this. This happens in the U.S. and right at the end of a presidential campaign. And so it's got the issue, it's been a big issue, and now it has to be handled by the candidate. So Vice President Harris, and this has been a thorny issue, as you know, for the vice president in her campaign, said the following earlier today in Wisconsin. Let's listen.
Justice has been served, and the United States, Israel, and the entire world are better off as a result. Sinwar was responsible for the killing of thousands of innocent people, including the victims of October 7 and hostages killed in Gaza. He had American blood on his hands. Today, I can only hope that the families of the victims of Hamas feel a sense and measure of relief.
So that's what she said, Noah, at an event at a college, I believe, in Wisconsin, where there were pro-Palestinian protesters outside, and this was a closed event inside. Your thoughts on this?
My thoughts on this is that this approach and this response is highly appropriate. This is exactly the response that needs to be given. Yahya Sinwar was the main obstacle for a ceasefire, main obstacle for a hostage deal. He was the one who single-handedly destabilized the entire Middle East and was responsible for killing not just Israelis, but tens of thousands of Palestinians as well. As I said before, we got to let Israel win. Israel's the one that's doing the dirty job for many countries in the region and for the United States, for that matter. Those people should not be with us. If you are a jihadist that thinks that the holy war to the end until the caliphate is enacted, this is not compatible with American values, not at all. So it's Israel's responsibility because it's our lives that are at stakes, but it's also doing the work for the rest of the world. And I believe Israel and the IDF is going to continue doing exactly that.
Noah, thank you. We appreciate your perspective today. Thanks a lot for coming on. Now, we have continuing coverage of all this breaking news. Much more to come as NewsNation Now continues. Keep it here.